The security footage would later be described by a retired detective as the most extraordinary 30 seconds I've ever seen on a monitor. 5 grown men, 1 woman, a parking garage on the south side of the city at 11:47 p.m., and a 7-year-old boy standing completely still in the middle of it all, eating a lollipop like he was watching a nature documentary. By the time the last man hit the concrete, Jade Rivers was breathing harder than usual, but not because she was afraid. She was late for her shift. She stepped over a pair of legs, smoothed the front of her jacket, and looked down at the boy. "You good?" The boy tilted his head, looked at the 5 unconscious bodies surrounding them, looked back at her. "Your left hook has a slight telegraphing problem," he said, "but overall, solid 9 out of 10. Jade stared at him. "How old are you?" "Old enough to notice you almost slipped on the oil patch in Sector C," he pointed. "You compensated well, though." She had no idea who this child was. She had no idea whose child this was. And she had absolutely no idea that within 72 hours, the most dangerous man in the Pacific Northwest would be sitting across from her, not to hurt her but to thank her. And then to offer her something that would change her life forever. But first, she had to survive what was coming next. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, you need to subscribe right now, because this channel is where the stories that sound impossible turn out to be completely real in every way that matters. Hit that like button if you're already invested in Jade, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what do you think the Korean Mafia Kingpin does when he finds out what happened tonight? Go. I'll wait. Now let's get into it. Jade Rivers was 26 years old, 5'7", and had been a certified personal protection specialist for exactly 11 months. Before that, she'd spent 4 years in the Army, 2 of them attached to a specialized close-quarters training program that most people in her hometown of Tacoma didn't know existed. She didn't talk about it. She didn't post about it. She just worked her overnight security shift at a logistics warehouse called Meridian Cold Storage, went to the gym in the mornings, and sent money home to her grandmother every 2 weeks without fail. She was nobody special, according to the world. She was parking her '09 Civic on level 2 of the Halsted Street garage when she heard it. Not screaming, not running feet, just a single, flat voice, the voice of a man who was used to not being questioned, saying, "Pick him up, let's go." Jade turned off her engine, sat still for exactly 3 seconds, then she got out of the car. The scene at the far end of the garage was this: 5 men in dark clothing. One of them was holding the arm of a small boy in a navy peacoat. The boy was not struggling. He was not crying. He was instead holding his lollipop in his free hand and staring at the man gripping him with an expression that could only be described as academic disappointment. "You're making a significant tactical error," the boy said calmly. The man blinked. "What did you just say to me, little?" "Your exit route is blocked by a structural column. You have 1 functional vehicle for 5 people and a child. The response time for police in this sector is 4 minutes, but I already activated my emergency beacon 40 seconds ago, so you're running short." He paused. "Also, there's a woman behind you who looks like she has a background in combatives, and she's been calculating your positions for the last 20 seconds. Every head turned. Jade stopped walking. She was now 30 feet away. She looked at the 5 men. She looked at the boy. She registered the grip on his arm, the positioning of the others, the oil patch on the ground in her peripheral vision. "Let him go," she said. The largest of the 5 men, a wall of a person with a shaved head and a jaw like a cinder block, actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, a genuinely amused laugh, like someone had told an unexpectedly good joke. "Walk away, sweetheart." Jade had been called sweetheart approximately 400 times in her life by men who immediately regretted it. "Last time," she said. What happened in the next 30 seconds was later reconstructed from the security footage frame by frame. Jaw-like Cinderblock moved first, big mistake, because he was slow and she was already inside his reach before he finished the motion. She used his own momentum, redirected it, put him down with a controlled throw that cracked his shoulder against the concrete. Man 2 came from her left. She dropped, swept his legs, stood back up before he finished falling. Man 3 pulled something from his jacket. She read it before it cleared, closed the distance, stripped it with a 2-handed technique that left his wrist bent at an angle it was not designed for. His howl echoed off the garage walls. Men 4 and 5 hesitated for exactly 1 second. That second was enough. By the time it was over, Jade's knuckles were slightly raw, her left ankle had a dull ache from the compensation move near the oil patch, and 5 grown men were in various states of horizontal misery on the concrete floor of level 2. She looked at the boy. The boy was still eating his lollipop. 9.2, he revised. The wrist strip was textbook. "Who are you?" Jade said. "My name is Jun Seo," the boy said. "I'm 7. I have 2 emergency contacts programmed into my watch. Both of them are going to arrive here in approximately." He checked his watch, which was not a children's watch. 6 minutes. "You should probably stay. They'll want to thank you." "I have a shift," Jade said. "You have 37 minutes before you're due at Meridian Cold Storage on Harbor Boulevard," Junseo said. "I looked you up while you were fighting. Your name is Jade Rivers. You're a licensed protection specialist. Your grandmother's name is Loretta and she lives on Cypress Street." He paused. "I'm thorough." Jade stared at this child for a long, unblinking moment. "How?" she said. "I'm good with phones," he said. "Also, you had your company ID clipped to your jacket when you got out of the car. The rest was inference." He tilted the lollipop. "You should stay. My father is going to want to meet you." She stayed. She didn't know why. She told herself it was because she couldn't leave a 7-year-old alone in a parking garage surrounded by unconscious felons. That was true. But there was something about the calm certainty in this boy's voice, like he was describing weather patterns, not his own kidnapping, that made her feet stay planted on the concrete. The first car arrived in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Black, long, the kind of vehicle that costs more than Jade's annual salary and makes no sound when it moves. 2 men in suits got out. They assessed the scene with the practiced neutrality of people who had seen worse. One of them spoke into his collar, the other approached Jade. "Ms. Rivers." She hadn't told anyone her name. "The boy already called it in," Jade said. "Yes." The man, mid-40s Korean with the posture of someone who had once been military and never quite left, looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "Mr. Kwon has been notified. He is on his way." "Who is Mr. Kwon?" The suited man looked at her for a beat too long. "Junseo's father," he said carefully. The second car arrived 8 minutes later. Same make, same color, same silence. The man who stepped out was not what Jade expected. She had constructed a picture in her mind during the wait based on the boy, based on the suits, based on the cars of someone loud and demonstrative, someone who would arrive with noise. Hyen Woo Kwon arrived with none. He was 51 years old, silver at his temples, a coat that probably cost as much as the car. He walked to his son with the measured steps of a man who controlled every room he entered by doing absolutely nothing, and he crouched down to Junseo's level and spoke to him in Korean quietly for about 30 seconds. The boy answered, pointed at the unconscious men, pointed at Jade, said something that made his father close his eyes briefly. Then Hyen Woo Kwon stood up, and he looked at Jade Rivers. "My son tells me you defeated 5 men to protect him." "I was in the area," Jade said. "He also tells me you almost slipped on an oil patch but compensated with a lateral weight transfer that he found impressive." The man's face showed nothing, but something in his voice was not warm exactly. "Present. My son does not use the word impressive lightly." "He gave me a 9.2, Jade said. For the first time, something moved at the corner of Hyen Woo Kwon's mouth, not quite a smile, the idea of one. "I would like to speak with you," he said. "Tomorrow, at your convenience, my associate will provide details." He reached into his coat, produced a card and held it out. Plain white, 1 phone number, nothing else. Jade took it, looked at him. "What is it you do, Mr. Kwon?" He looked back at her with those steady, unreadable eyes. "Import and export," he said. The 5 men on the ground were loaded into a separate vehicle. The police arrived 11 minutes later, right on Junseo's predicted schedule, and found nothing except an oil patch and a 7-year-old's lollipop wrapper folded into a perfect origami crane, left on the ground like a calling card. Jade drove to her shift, spent 6 hours loading manifests and watching a security monitor, and at 6:14 a.m. she pulled out the plain white card and called the number. She had no idea, none at all, what she had just walked into. The meeting was at a place called the Celadon, a private restaurant on the 43rd floor of a building downtown that didn't appear on any public business registry Jade could find. She spent the morning before the meeting doing what she always did before stepping into an unknown situation: research. What she found and didn't find was alarming. Hyen Woo Kwon existed on paper in exactly the right ways: a legitimate import company registered in Seoul and Seattle, a charitable foundation supporting education programs in underserved communities. A brief mention in a business journal from 2019 describing him as a quiet but influential figure in Pacific Rim commerce. His son attended a private school under a different surname. His address, if he had one, was nowhere in any database she could access. What she couldn't find was equally loud. No social media, no photographs outside of one grainy conference image from 2017, no associates named publicly, no employees traceable beyond two shell-structured corporate addresses. Jade had known people like this before, in the army, on the other side of situations she wasn't allowed to describe in writing. She went to the meeting anyway. The Celadon was all dark wood and low light and the kind of silence that money buys. Juncio was there, sitting at the table with a tablet in his lap, and he looked up when she walked in with the satisfaction of someone whose calculations had been confirmed. "You're 4 minutes early," he said. "I told father you would be." "Where is your father?" "He'll be 2 minutes, he's finishing a call." Juncio set down the tablet. "He wanted me to tell you that last night's 5 men have been identified. They were not random, they were sent by someone." Jade sat down. "Sent by who?" "That's what we're working on." Juncio tilted his head. "You're not afraid?" "I'm cautious," Jade said. "Different thing. Most people who find out what my father does become afraid." "I don't know what your father does yet." "Yes, you do," Juncio said, with the serenity of a child who had never in his life been underestimated by himself. "You just don't have confirmation. Your face has been making the math since you walked in." He paused. "For what it's worth, he's never had anyone kidnap me before. Last night was new." Hyun-woo Kwon came in exactly on schedule. He sat, ordered tea for the table without asking, and got directly to the point in a way that Jade would come to recognize as his defining characteristic. "I want to offer you a position," he said. "Dedicated protection for my son, full-time. The compensation will be—" He named a number that Jade kept her face very flat about. "Quarterly plus housing plus an operating budget." "You have security already," Jade said. "I have soldiers," he said. "I need someone who thinks." He looked at her steadily. "Juncio does not like soldiers. He has informed me at some length that he finds them intellectually unstimulating. He has, however, already submitted a formal evaluation of your performance last night, including a technical breakdown of your combative response, and recommended you unanimously." "It was a panel of one," Jade said. "He's very thorough," Hyun-woo said, in exactly the same tone his son had used the night before. Jade looked between them, father and son, the same eyes, the same stillness, the same quality of absolute certainty worn lightly like a coat. "Tell me who sent those men," she said. Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was measured and without drama, which made it more frightening than drama would have. "His name is Raymond Voss. He is a logistics intermediary, which is a polite way of saying he manages the movement of things that require unofficial channels. He and I have had a business arrangement for 6 years. 3 months ago he decided that arrangement was no longer profitable enough for him and attempted to renegotiate by other means. I declined. Last night was his second attempt at leverage." "He kidnapped your son," Jade said. "He attempted to," Hyun-woo said. "He failed partly because my son activated his beacon and partly because you were in the correct parking garage at the correct time." He paused. "I don't believe in coincidence, but I believe in opportunity." "If I take this job," Jade said, "and Voss tries again." "He will," Hyun-woo said simply. "Then I need full information, not filtered, not managed, everything." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, so slightly that anyone not paying close attention would have missed it, but Jade was always paying close attention. "My son chose well," he said. "She took the job." Over the next 3 weeks, Jade learned the shape of Hyun-woo Kwon's world. It was vast and structured and operating in the shadow of multiple legal jurisdictions simultaneously. He ran what could generously be called a gray market network, importing goods through channels that existed in the spaces between regulations, employing dozens of people, and maintaining relationships with law enforcement officials and criminal organizations across 3 countries by the simple mechanism of being more useful to everyone alive than dead. He had not started wars. He had, on at least 4 occasions that his security chief described obliquely, ended them. He was, by most measures, a reasonable man doing unreasonable things in the most organized way possible. Raymond Voss was the opposite. He was noise where Hyun-woo was silence. He was anger where Hyun-woo was calculation, and he was, according to every piece of intelligence that came across Jade's desk in those 3 weeks, escalating. There had been 2 more incidents. A vehicle that followed Junseo's school transport for 11 blocks before Jade noticed and rerouted. An attempt to access the school's administrative records, unsuccessful, because Junseo attended under a different name, a fact that his father had implemented 2 years ago with the patience of someone who planned for things before they happened. But the intelligence was getting sharper. Voss was closing in on something. And Jade, who had spent 3 weeks living in this world and learning its geometry, was beginning to understand that the endgame wasn't just about leverage anymore. It was about destruction. She found the thread on a Tuesday. She was reviewing Meridian Cold Storage, her old employer, out of habit. Cross-referencing shipping manifests the way she used to when she worked there, looking for irregularities, the same thing she'd done to keep herself mentally sharp on overnight shifts. And she found something that shouldn't have been there. A series of transfers. Merchandise listed as industrial refrigeration parts. Routed through Meridian, through 2 intermediary companies and ultimately traceable, if you knew what you were looking for, to a legal firm that represented 3 city council members and a deputy district attorney. Raymond Voss wasn't just trying to destroy Hyun-woo Kwon's operation. He was trying to use it. He was building a file, manufactured evidence, false shipping records, fraudulent paper trails that would implicate Kwon in something Kwon hadn't done. He was going to hand it to the deputy district attorney and light the match. And by the time the legal process played out, it wouldn't matter what was true. The operation would be exposed, the associates would scatter, the network would collapse. And Junseo would have no protection at all. Jade brought it to Hyun-woo that evening. She laid the documents on the table. She walked him through every step of the trail. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was the highest expression of respect in his vocabulary. When she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. "He's not going to stop," Jade said. "No," Hyun-woo agreed. "Then we need to move first." He looked at her. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing," Jade said carefully, "that we give him exactly what he wants and make sure the whole city is watching when it falls apart." Raymond Voss got the call on a Thursday morning. A source inside Kwon's organization, someone he'd spent 9 months cultivating, feeding small amounts of money and smaller amounts of false trust, told him that a shipment was moving through Meridian Cold Storage the following Saturday night. A big one. The kind that, if documented and reported, would be the centerpiece of the case Voss had been constructing for months. The source was Jade Rivers. She had volunteered for the role herself, and Hyun-woo had taken 4 full minutes of silent consideration before agreeing, which she understood was his version of urgent reluctance. The plan was precise. Voss would bring his documentation, all of it, to the Saturday meeting at Meridian, expecting to leave with additional evidence to complete his fabricated case. What he would find instead was the deputy district attorney herself, brought there not by Voss's people, but by a sealed tip filed 48 hours earlier through a verified legal channel. A tip that included the full scope of Voss's manufactured evidence scheme, the shell companies, the falsified records, and 3 years of communication logs that Junseo had spent 6 days extracting from Voss's private server. Because here's the thing about Junseo that no one outside of his father's inner circle fully understood: the boy was not just smart. He was operationally gifted in a way that even Hyun-woo described, with quiet pride and a certain parental unease, as perhaps exceeding what I anticipated at this stage. Junseo had found the breach in Voss's server on day 2. By day 4 he had a complete record of every fabricated document, every bribed official, every communication between Voss and the 3 council members he'd co-opted into the scheme. On day 6 he presented his findings to Jade in a color-coded folder with executive summary tabs. "You made tabs," Jade said. "Clarity is a form of respect for the reader," Junseo said. The Saturday meeting was set for 10 p.m. at Meridian Cold Storage. Jade arrived at 7 p.m. and walked the building the way she had walked it for 2 years on overnight shifts, knowing every camera angle, every shadow, every door. She positioned Hyun-woo's security team in locations that would not be visible to Voss's people, but would be immediately effective if required. She confirmed the deputy district attorney's unmarked vehicle in the lot across the street at 9:15. She checked her own sightlines. At 9:47, Voss arrived with 4 men different from the garage, more professional looking. That was fine. Jade had anticipated professional. At 9:52, Jade met him at the loading dock. Voss was a large man, pink-faced and well-dressed in the way of someone who had money recently rather than generationally, with the specific confidence of someone who had never once in his life been physically challenged by someone who looked like Jade Rivers. He looked her up and down with barely concealed dismissal. "You're the source," he said. "I'm the source," she said. "You have the documents." He had a case, compact, hard-sided. He didn't hand it over. "First, I want to see what's in the shipment." "Walk with me," she said. She led him into the storage facility, talking as she went, keeping her voice level and her cadence steady, drawing on 2 years of knowing exactly which corridors had acoustics, which cameras had functional mics, which walls were thin enough to carry sound to the next room. The deputy district attorney was in the next room. Voss talked freely, the way people do when they believe they have all the power. He described the scheme in his own words: the fabricated records, the council members on his payroll, the specific documents in the case he was carrying that he intended to submit as evidence. He described without prompting the kidnapping attempt in the garage. "Leverage," he said without apparent discomfort. "The kid was supposed to be insurance." "The kid is 7, Jade said. "His father is Hyun-woo Kwon," Voss said like that was an answer. "And what do you think Hyun-woo Kwon is going to do," Jade said, "when this falls apart?" Voss stopped walking. Something changed in his posture, not fear, not yet, the beginning of a calculation. "What did you say?" Jade turned around. Behind her, the loading dock door opened. The deputy district attorney walked in with 2 investigators. From the side corridor, Hyun-woo's security closed the remaining exits quietly and efficiently. And from a small office window on the upper level of the facility, where he had insisted on being present despite Jade's firm recommendation against it, Jun Seo watched with the unblinking focus of a 7-year-old who had done his homework and was now watching it become a grade. Voss understood. It took him about 4 seconds, which Jade thought was actually faster than she'd expected. "You're not a source," he said. "No," she agreed. "You've been working for him this whole." "I've been working for his son technically," Jade said. "The official title is protection specialist." She paused. "You tried to use a 7-year-old as a bargaining chip, twice." She tilted her head slightly. "That was a mistake." The deputy district attorney stepped forward. She was carrying the sealed filing, Jun Seo's documentation, authenticated and submitted 2 days prior. She looked at Voss with the expression of someone who had been handed a gift-wrapped case and fully intended to use it. What followed was not dramatic. There were no raised voices. Voss's 4 men were separated and secured without incident. The hard-sided case was taken as evidence. Voss himself was walked out of Meridian cold storage at 10:31 p.m. on a Saturday night with his wrists bound and his manufactured empire crumbling in real time. 3 city council members received visits from federal investigators the following morning. The deputy district attorney who had been on Voss's payroll, a different one, Junior, who had been handling the evidence intake, was identified through Jun Seo's server extraction and suspended pending investigation by 11 a.m. Sunday. Hyun-woo stood beside Jade in the cold storage bay after Voss was removed, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "Your son was watching from the window," Jade said. "I know," Hyun-woo said. "He will want to debrief later. He'll have notes." "He always has notes." Another silence, not uncomfortable. "The 5 men from the garage," Jade said, "are they going to be a problem?" "They are no longer employed by anyone relevant," Hyun-woo said, which told her everything and nothing simultaneously, and she decided that was sufficient. 6 weeks after the night at Meridian Cold Storage, Jade Rivers sat across from Jun Seo at a kitchen table in a house she was now officially living in, a modest townhouse 2 blocks from his school, provided by his father as part of the employment arrangement, and watched him eat cereal with the focused deliberation of someone conducting an experiment. "You have a meeting today," he said without looking up. "I know. Father wants to revise the operational structure for the next quarter. He's going to ask your opinion on 3 things and already know his own answer to 2 of them." He finally looked up. "The third one he genuinely doesn't know. That's the one you should actually pay attention to." "How do you know which one that is?" "He does this thing with his left hand when he's uncertain," Jun Seo said. "Slight tension in the 3rd finger, you'll see it." Jade looked at him for a moment. "Has anyone told you that you're a slightly alarming child?" "Regularly," he said contentedly. Mrs. Patterson at school says it's because I read ahead of the curriculum. My therapist says it's because I process stress through analysis. I say it's because I pay attention. He returned to his cereal. You should pay attention more, you're already good at it, but there's room. She laughed, it was a real one. Raymond Voss was formally indicted on 9 counts, including fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and charges related to the kidnapping attempt. The latter filed based on the parking garage footage and the testimony of a 7-year-old witness who delivered his account with such precise clarity and calm authority that the prosecutor described it afterward as the most composed deposition I've sat through in 22 years. Jun Seo had naturally prepared a written supplement to his verbal testimony and submitted it formatted in accordance with the court's documentation guidelines. The 3 council members plea bargained. The junior district attorney resigned before charges were filed. The fabricated evidence case collapsed completely under scrutiny, leaving Hyun-woo Kwon's operation untouched by the legal system, which was, Jade understood exactly where he preferred it. As for the nature of that operation, what Jade learned over the following months was more nuanced than the picture she'd painted in her mind during the first weeks. Hyun-woo was not a simple villain. He was a man who had built something functional and morally complex in the space where legal structures failed, and who had somewhere along the way become genuinely invested in the city around him. The charitable foundation was real. The education programs employed 47 people. The network, for all its gray market machinery, ran on a code that he enforced with the same quiet consistency he brought to everything. Jade didn't pretend any of it was clean. She wasn't built for pretending. But she was built for protection, and Jun Seo was worth protecting. On the last Sunday of that month, Jade and Jun Seo were walking back from his school's science fair. He had entered a project on predictive modeling in urban traffic systems and won first place, then spent 15 minutes explaining to the judges why the scoring rubric had 3 structural inefficiencies, when he stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at her. "Can I ask you something? You always ask. Why did you stay that night in the garage? After the men were down, you didn't know who I was, you had a shift to get to." He tilted his head in that way he had. "What made you stay?" Jade thought about it, the honest version, not the easy one. "You weren't scared," she said. "Anybody else, any other kid would have been shaking. You were eating a lollipop and grading my technique." She paused. "I wanted to know why. And now you know. Some of it." He considered this. "I wasn't scared because I calculated that the probability of a negative outcome dropped significantly when you got out of your car. I recognized your stance." He looked at her. "You were the variable that changed everything, so I wasn't afraid." She thought about that for a long time after. About being the variable that changes things. About what it means to be standing in the right place at the right moment, not because of luck but because of who you are and what you've built yourself into and what you're willing to do when the world asks. Jade Rivers had spent her whole life being nobody special according to everyone who wasn't paying attention. Jun Seo paid attention. Hyun-woo Kwon, who was not a man given to speeches or visible sentiment, had said only 2 things to her on the day her official contract was signed. The first was the compensation figure. The second was delivered after a pause, standing at the window of his 43rd floor office looking out at the city. "My son has never asked me for anything," he said. "Not once in 7 years he asked me for you." Jade had not known what to do with that. She still didn't entirely. But she knew what she did with it in practice. She showed up every morning, walked Jun Seo to school and back, sat across from him while he ate cereal and told her things about people's hands that she later confirmed were always true, stood in the rooms that needed standing in and kept the world from reaching what needed protecting. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud. It was consistent and it was skilled, and it was exactly what she had trained her whole life to do, just not for anyone she'd ever imagined. 3 months later, Raymond Voss was convicted on 7 of 9 counts. The sentencing was scheduled for spring. The courtroom footage, specifically the part where Jun Seo's written supplemental testimony was read aloud into the record, was described by a legal reporter as extraordinary, which was a word that kept following this 7-year-old around like it had nowhere else to be. On the night the verdict came in, Jade was at the kitchen table again. Jun Seo came downstairs in his school pajamas, dark blue, because he had opinions about colors, and sat across from her and looked at the news notification on her phone. "Convicted," he said. 7 counts. He nodded once, The nod of someone whose model had predicted this outcome and was acknowledging the confirmation without gloating. He was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think," he said. "I rarely know what you think until you tell me." "I think the variable changes everything," he said. "You being in that garage, the lollipop wrapper I left as a signal, father having a person who thinks instead of just a person who follows orders." He looked at her steadily. "All of it hinges on one night, one decision, you getting out of your car." "You signaled with the wrapper," Jade said. "Origami crane, standard distress symbol in certain circles." He blinked. "I assumed you knew." "I did not know." "I'll add it to your training curriculum," he said, and got up to go back to bed with the confidence of someone who had been managing adults his entire life and expected to continue doing so indefinitely. Jade sat at the kitchen table for a while after he went upstairs. She thought about parking garages and origami cranes and oil patches and the 30 seconds that had redirected the whole shape of her life. She thought about a boy who calculated probabilities and a father who moved through the world like weather, present, inevitable, leaving things different from how he found them. She thought about being the variable that changes everything. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she'd come to recognize as Hyun Woo's. It said "thank you." 2 words from a man who spent most of his life saying nothing he didn't have to say. She understood the weight of it. She typed back 9.2. 3 seconds later, another message came through. He said the same. Jade Rivers put her phone face down on the kitchen table and smiled at the ceiling of a house she hadn't expected to live in, working a job she hadn't expected to take, for a family she hadn't expected to find, because she'd gotten out of her car on a Thursday night in a South Side parking garage and decided that 5 men and a 7-year-old with a lollipop were her problem. Some decisions look small from the outside. None of the important ones actually are. If this story hit different for you, hit that like button right now because that's how more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you're not already here because we do this every week and it only gets sharper. And in the comments, I want to know which moment hit hardest for you. Was it Jun Seo giving the real-time tactical critique mid-kidnapping? Was it the origami crane? Or was it Hyun Woo Kwon, the most powerful man in the room, saying his son had never once asked him for anything until he asked for her? Drop it below. I read everything. See you in the next one.